I'll put it up again. If God was able to create a perfect world without sin, why didn't he? Why are we free?
I guess I'm questioning more of also the biblical God, because the character in my eyes doesn't match the creation and the effect of it and what goes on. So if he's the author and creator of logic itself, why wouldn't it be logical for me to be still able to be a free will thinking person, but at the same time just automatically loving him, but not having any choice to oppose that perfect creation? It would be logical because God is the author of logic. So what would your answer to be, or what would your attempt be? I'm not sure how to word that or phrase that, but
there's a lot to unpack in what you asked, because what you asked is basically, let's say, the mainstay island of confusion that most atheism sprouts from. So most of the time when somebody's an atheist, it's not because they look at the cosmos and think that, well, this obviously wasn't design. That's preposterous. Like, usually they're willing to concede that it has the appearance of design. Usually the problem is what we call the emotional problem of pain or evil. Ultimately, evil is not a logic problem, because logic never gets you to the idea that someone else's pain is worth your sacrifice. That's not a logic problem. That's a moral and emotional problem. In order to have the virtues of care, protection, admiration, and veneration for innocence the way that you do, you need something beyond pure logic or reason in order to arrive there. And so God wouldn't have you having any of the emotive states of desire, love, any of those things that are actually what I would say is life worth having. All of those things are in fact tied to your ability to freely choose. And so it's not that free will is an answer to why evil is excusable. The main pointed direction of the question was, is it illogical for God to do something that's illogical? Would it then make it logic simply because God's the arbiter of logic? And I would say no, because coherence is a real thing. God can do things that are within the realm of reasonable possibility. But if you were to say, can God make himself? No, he can't, because he's God. He's unmade. That's not a logic problem. That's not something because God's the arbiter of logic, he can then violate logic and make himself. That doesn't make any sense in principle. So it's not a logic problem. It's simply not logical, right? So in the same way, can God make free creatures that aren't free? No, he can't. And not because he's not omnipotent, but because that's just incoherent. Having creatures that are not free to love God are simply not loving God. That's the most direct answer you could give, is that love is not an automated response to anything. Pooping is an automated response. Sneezing is an automated response. Saying ow when you crush your finger is an automated response. Love is not an automated response. So it's not going to be comported the same way. And if you made love an automated response, it would cease to be the virtue and wonder that it is. When the Bible says God is love, it doesn't mean any automated responses. It means that God is loving to the three persons of his being. And in between those three persons, there is an eternal willful engagement of love and honor and allegiance toward one another from the self. That means there has to be a self. If you're a self, you're aware that you're a self and there are other selves. You now have the awful opportunity to put yourself first. And that's where sin comes from. Sin doesn't come simply from being free. Sin comes from being corrupt in your intent, in your will. And sometimes that corruption is accidental. And what I mean by that is you don't know better. I was saying ignorance is a real thing, right? Not knowing better is a real thing. And when my children sin, and you have children around you, so you know this, when children sin, they usually do so because they don't know. What do they know? They don't know anything. And so they sin because they don't know. They're not infallible. They're not perfect. They don't lack nothing, right? And so without the position of being omniscient, omnipotent, and perfect, meaning you lack nothing, not just morally, perfect and incapable of iniquity, because that's not what perfect means, at least not in the Bible. Perfect means to be complete and lack nothing. Those are the things that humans lack. Why do they lack them? Simply because they aren't God. They're an image of God. And so they don't have godhood. They have traits that mirror God. And what that gives them is the ability to be creative, the ability to desire, the ability to will, the ability to reason, the ability to love, the ability to have disdain, the ability to recognize justice and injustice, for that matter. And so the fact that you're appalled by people who treat children wrongly is evidence not that God is evil or it should be called into question, but in fact that you're made in his image, and all the more reason for you to agree with him. The question is, why does God allow anything? Because it's not like God is incapable of scripting all of reality from top to bottom, and yet he has evidently elected not to do so. And so if God has evidently elected not to script reality from top to bottom, there's some reasonable understanding that we can come to as to why he would elect not to do that. One of the answers that you can give, if you're not willing to stay completely vague about it, is that God decided to make man free. The question then becomes, why did God make man free? What I would lay out for that specifically is the notion of love and allegiance. Without love or allegiance, relationship, as we understand that word to have any depth of meaning, is impossible. And so if we want a relationship with our creator, we don't get to be automata. You don't get to have an automated response. That's not relationship, right? So when somebody, let's say if my wife and I live together, if we get to the point where all of my responses to her are automated and not willful actions, we're going to end up more like roommates than like lovers. There's merely the proximity of being in the same place at the same time, not even for the same reason. And so in order to maintain relationship in any way that makes it intimate and worth having, beyond mere acquaintance, you need the ability to trust. You need the ability to love. You need the capacity for allegiance. And you don't have any of those things if you're simply an autonoma, right? If you are like a stone, stones don't hate anyone and they don't sin, but they also cannot love. So if God made a world without sinful creatures, that's fine. He did so in Genesis 1. But if God made a world that is incapable of falling short and sinning, he would have to make one without volition, or at least one without experiences. If your love is an automated response, like a sneeze or going to the bathroom, then it doesn't have the meaning or gravitas or weight or glory as the Bible talks about. It doesn't have any of the attributes that make love what it is. And so it wouldn't be an equivalency. It would be a synthesis. And what I mean by that is it would be a synthetic. It would be artificial. This is something that I learned from John Lennox. Let's say I have a wife. She's beautiful, but she's a robotic wife, and she has a touchboard display just below her neck where I can walk up and I can push the button that's appropriately marked kiss, and then she gives me a beautiful robotic kiss. Her automated response is not worth the response of a real woman who, without the prompt of cause and effect, gives you a kiss of the same kind. Her kiss means something in a way that a robotic kiss does not. And that's exactly the point.